Another inexcusable tragedy has unfolded in the United States. But as Americans scream at each other about guns and Islam, and as homophobics show their true colors, there's a glaring pattern in mass shootings that few people seem to recognize. Omar Mateen posted multiple pictures of himself wearing New York Police Department-themed t-shirts, and at one point dreamed of being a cop. And the unfortunate truth is that he is far from the first shooter to show a proclivity for government power. The San Bernardino shooters, one of whom was born and raised in America, wore tactical gear to their shootout last December, and even initial reports of 3 white men, which mysteriously faded from the news cycle, had them in military gear as well. Chris Harper Mercer, who shot up a school in Oregon, left the Army after a suicide attempt and often wore military fatigue pants as a regular outfit. Elliot Rodger, the misogynistic mass shooter, was drawn to Nazis, not quite American, but representative of big government, authoritarianism, and militarism nonetheless. Adam Lanza, the infamous Sandy Hook killer, wore military-style clothing to massacre children. Paul Ciancio wore fatigues to shoot up the Los Angeles International Airport. The Navy Yard shooter was a member of the military and conducted his rampage on military grounds. Even cop killer Eric Frayne, who shot at Pennsylvania state troopers in 2014, came from a military family, reenacted old European battles, and carried military gear and camouflage face paint. He also had an American military tactical handbook. James Holmes, the deranged movie theater killer, wore battle gear to his shootout. The tragic shooting at a Sikh temple was carried out by a military veteran. The Fort Hood shooter was a member of the military and committed his shooting on military grounds. And then there were the Columbine shooters, one of whom came from a military family but was rejected by the Marines. Of course, it's absolutely the case that there are a variety of intersecting issues that cause tragedies like this. It's not just an affinity for battle and militarism, and simply liking the military doesn't make you a terrorist. But consider the most traumatizing, vicious, heart-wrenching cases, the ones mainstream media shoves down Americans' throats for hours, days, and weeks on end. Consider those, the ones waged by psychopaths who felt drawn to morally permissible forms of violence and often view their own atrocities as transcendent battles that bring meaning to their otherwise tortured lives. Whether the shooter in these instances is white or brown, atheist or Muslim makes no difference. They are all American born and raised, and what does America do best? It wages war, it drops bombs, it propagandistically morphs these moral depravities into courageous pursuits of freedom to the American public. We cheer death when it fits our narratives. We are riled up by war films and celebrate government agents who kill the most people. We can't quite be bothered enough to help the veterans, yet we threaten to rape, maim, and murder those who question the military. We nationalistically insist our violence is permissible, if not preordained by God.
This crusade, this war on terrorism is going to take a while.
Our American identity is one of strength, power, perceived superiority, and the extremism that comes along with it. We are a culture of killers, whether in deed or fantastical fetish. We champion government violence as a first resort, both in foreign countries and on the streets of the United States. So really, it shouldn't be surprising the deranged Orlando shooter looked up to the deranged shooters of the New York Police Department, a department trained by the Israeli military and armed by the American one. It shouldn't be a surprise that when these sick individuals act out their grandiose massacres, they do it American style, guns blazing, often armed in battle gear. Even if some of them were inspired by other governments and militant movements, it shows the power of authority and violence, and that wanting to belong to it attracts a similar kind of crazy. Of course, people must already be unhinged to fall into such extremism, but what does it say about the nature of power that these institutions attract that type of person in the first place? While other countries undoubtedly have problems with authoritarianism and violence, and that is not to be discounted, America continues to be the biggest exporter of arms, the largest, best-funded military, and the most imperialistic one. And as we ignore this reality out of fear and in exchange for a false sense of security, American state violence will continue domestically and abroad, killing innocents, sowing anti-American animosity, creating terrorists, and inspiring homegrown threats as well. One of the Boston bombers was inspired by the Iraq War. One of the Charlie Hebdo shooters was radicalized by the same thing. Yet the American people continue to be oblivious as to why these attacks keep happening, even though the shooter offered at least one reason why. None of this makes the actions of terrorists right or excusable. It's a horrible, heartbreaking tragedy, and also one in which the official story should be questioned. But clearly, bombing the Middle East for a decade and a half has failed to solve the problem. So why do we keep believing that if we just elect our guy and suspend the freedoms we think are dangerous, everything will be fixed? Why do we keep believing the government's anointed violence will keep us safe and their guns are good? Perhaps it's time to take a look in the mirror, America. But if you insist that this militarism and culture of violence is so triumphant and so vital and so deserving of the utmost reverence, ask yourself why yet another terror attack landed squarely in America's backyard when the government you want to empower more with gun bans, Muslim bans, further military crusades, and more surveillance was supposed to be keeping you safe. Sending love with a heavy heart to all the victims of all violence all around the world, with good reason to believe the human race may someday overcome its insatiable desire to hate and slaughter itself.